while millions of people are currently screaming at their televisions, painting their faces in neon war paint, and feeling emotionally destroyed because 11 total strangers lost a game of inches, there is a massive, quiet group of people who just don't care. And if you are one of them, you've likely felt the weight of that silence when the room erupts in a roar you don't understand. According to neuroscience, your brain might actually be wired on a completely different frequency than the sports-obsessed people in your life. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you will completely change how you see that disconnect. Here is the thing nobody talks about. Not caring about sports doesn't make you boring, and it certainly doesn't mean you lack passion. It definitely doesn't mean there is something wrong with you. But there is something fascinating happening in your gray matter that is fundamentally different from the 60% of people who follow sports religiously. To understand the non-fan, we first have to understand the why behind the fanatic. Humans are, at our core, tribal creatures. For thousands of years, being part of a tight-knit group wasn't a hobby, it was survival. Your tribe protected you from predators, helped you hunt, and kept you alive. In the modern world, sports have become our modern tribes, just with better merchandise. When a fan watches their team, their brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which is the exact same chemical that makes you love your family. Their brain is essentially tricking them into believing these millionaire athletes are part of their literal clan. But here is where it gets interesting for you. People who don't obsess over sports often have what psychologists call lower tribal instincts. Your identity isn't as strongly tied to being part of a group. You are more individualistic. You're the type of person who is more likely to say, I don't need to belong to something bigger just to feel complete. There is actual research to back this up. A 2019 study found that people with low sports interest showed significantly less us versus them thinking. In plain English, you don't automatically hate the other team just because they aren't on your side. But it gets even weirder when we look at brain chemistry. You know that feeling when you're about to open a long-awaited present? That electric anticipation is dopamine firing in your brain. Sports fans get that exact same hit during every single play and every possession. They are experiencing constant microdoses of anticipation and reward. It is, in a very neurological sense, addictive. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that watching your team activates the same reward centers as gambling or other highly compelling addictive activities. And here is the kicker. The uncertainty is what makes it so powerful. Because you don't know if your team will win, that unpredictability keeps the dopamine flowing in a loop. This is called intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward schedule known to psychology. It's the same principle that makes slot machines so effective. Your brain doesn't distinguish much between the source of the dopamine, it just knows it wants more. If you are a non-fan, your dopamine system simply isn't triggered by vicarious competition, and this might actually be written in your code. Research from the University of Chicago suggests that variations in dopamine receptor genes can actually predict how much someone cares about competitive spectator activities. Your complete indifference to whether a specific team wins or loses might literally be in your DNA. While fans are busy burgeoning or basking in reflected glory, you are operating on a much more consistent level. When a fan's team wins, they say we won, but when they lose, they often switch to they lost. It's a psychological distancing act. But as a non-fan, you are more consistent in your self-concept. You don't need an external victory from a group of strangers to feel successful yourself. Your self-esteem is more stable and significantly less dependent on things that are completely outside of your control. Now, this doesn't mean you lack empathy. Interestingly, sports fans often score higher on certain empathy measures because they practice caring deeply about the struggles of strangers wearing their team's jersey. So, why don't you feel that same pull? It's all about empathy allocation. Everyone has a limited capacity for caring deeply about things. As a non-fan, you simply direct that empathy toward different places: social causes, personal relationships, creative projects, or intellectual challenges. A 2021 study found that people with low sports interest scored much higher in openness to experience and a love for art and beauty. You aren't avoiding the emotional high, You are just finding it in music, nature, or complex ideas. Your brain is seeking the same rewards of meaning, connection, and transcendence. You're just looking for them in places that offer actual reciprocity. You prefer investing your emotional energy where your care actually matters to the outcome, where you are a participant rather than a spectator. For you, the randomness of a sports game can feel meaningless. You might wonder why you should emotionally invest in an outcome you can't control, performed by people you don't know, in a game that doesn't affect your actual daily life. This isn't a flaw in your personality. It's a different approach to the human need for story and meaning. While one group finds an epic narrative in a championship run, you might find that same sense of flow, that moment of complete absorption in a novel, a scientific discovery, or a deep conversation. You are choosing to be engaged in your own struggle rather than spending hours every week experiencing someone else's. There is something quietly radical about that kind of presence. This lack of interest often carries a hidden backstory that makes your indifference far more than just a preference. It's a psychological boundary. For some, not caring about sports is actually an unintentional defense mechanism. Perhaps you were the one picked last in gym class, or you felt the cold sting of exclusion from a sports culture that didn't have a place for your brand of curiosity. In those moments, your brain didn't just decide sports were boring. It decided that the aggressive competitiveness and tribal gatekeeping, often tied to fandom, weren't worth the emotional price of admission. You began pushing back against a system that demanded you scream at a ball to prove your worth. This brings us to a fundamental difference in how we process the world: narrative versus randomness. To a sports fan, a game is a living, breathing epic, the underdog story, the miracle comeback, the dynasty rising from the ashes. It is compelling specifically because it is unpredictable drama with genuine social stakes. But for the non-fan, that same unpredictability feels entirely meaningless. You look at the field and see randomness that has no bearing on your actual reality. You find it difficult to justify an emotional investment in an outcome you can't influence, performed by people who don't know you exist. While the world tries to frame this as you missing out, researchers actually see it as a different strategy for navigating the human experience. Sports fans build what are known as parasocial relationships, one-sided emotional bonds with teams and players they will never meet. You, on the other hand, likely prefer direct engagement. You want to invest your limited emotional energy where there is actual reciprocity, where your presence matters to the outcome, and where you are a participant rather than a mere spectator. Neither approach is superior, but yours is arguably more grounded in the immediate reality of your own life. In fact, people who don't obsess over sports often report feeling more present. While others spend 3 hours every Sunday experiencing the vicarious struggle of someone else, you are engaged in your own. You are reclaiming that time for your own creative projects, your own relationships, and your own intellectual growth. There is something quietly radical about refusing to outsource your emotional highs to a corporation or a stadium. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who famously studied flow states, found that these moments of complete, blissful absorption can be achieved through almost any activity. For a fan, flow is found in the rhythm of the game. For you, it's found everywhere else. Whether it's the quiet focus of a novel, the intricate problem-solving of a creative project, or the transcendence of a long walk in nature, your brain is seeking the same meaning, it just refuses to find it in the noise. If you've ever felt like the odd one out during Super Bowl weekend or felt a wave of confusion when people treat a jersey like a holy relic, remember that your brain is simply calibrated for depth over tribalism. Your reward system, your empathy allocation, and your sense of self are not broken. They are just finely tuned to a different frequency. You aren't boring, and you aren't missing a fundamental human experience. And you are just playing a different game, one where the stakes are personal, the connection is real, and the victory is entirely your own. Understanding this won't make the sports fans in your life any quieter, but it might help you look at their face paint and jersey clutching with a little more compassion. They are just following an ancient tribal script. You, however, have decided to write your own. And in a world that is constantly trying to sell you a team to belong to, there is nothing more powerful than belonging to yourself.